And then I also, with this PowerPoint, I sent it in an email already, so you guys will be able to have a copy of that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's review a little bit about logistics and day one and see if you all have any questions left over from last time.
Okay.
I know we went over the trainers agreement and then we went through all the exercises and things, and I just want to make sure before we move on to day 2 and 3 that everybody's pretty much good with whatever questions they might have had.
Yeah.
No? All right. Going once, going twice.
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at day 2. And so this day kind of pushes us a little bit further into an understanding of our biases, how some of our differences can hinder us when we're working with recovery as a coach. We use a lot of building of communication skills in order to help participants understand the importance of asking good questions, and active listening without our own stuff getting in the way. And this day also contains those segments on sexual harassment, crisis intervention, transference, and countertransference. Just as recovery coaches are peers and will need some basic understanding on what to do if and when these situations arise. And again, those are 2 areas where you may, as an agency, want to provide your own information. Again, the couple of objectives that come from the original RCA that we address on day 2 are to build skills to enhance relationships, explore many dimensions of recovery and recovery coaching, and discover attitudes about self-disclosure and sharing your story. Any questions about that and what we're going to cover?
No.
Nope.
All right. So here's the agenda for day 2. This is the agenda that you're going to cover with the participants. It's also in their manual on page 29. We do a reconnection and a review. We build skills to enhance relationships. We look at active listening and communication skills. We look at values and differences. Another item is getting your buttons pushed, and that's that whole transference, countertransference. We have a segment on sexual harassment and one on crisis intervention. When we get back, we do some reconnection and journaling. We go and do a piece on stigma and labels, sharing your story, and then issues of self-disclosure. So that just gives everybody an idea of where we're headed. And we always review the agenda at the beginning of each day. So one of the pieces that we do in the RCA, and we've actually started doing it in all of our subsequent training programs, is an exercise that we call huddles and mingles. And so what we do is provide all the participants with an opportunity to talk about the previous day's learning. And so what we do is we assign a topic and we have people partner up for just a few minutes where they can kind of discuss that topic. And then we ask them to move into huddles. So instead of just, having one set of pairs, we ask pairs to kind of huddle up together and become a pair of 4 and give them another 2 or 3 minutes to talk about that same topic. And it just gives them a way to kind of bring some of the learning from yesterday into today's topics, as well as gives them an opportunity to talk about, answer any burning questions, things such as that. Gets them up and moving. And so we do probably about 2 or 3 rounds, depending on timing, depending on how many people you have. And this is just a really good way to kind of reconnect and get everybody focused on the task at hand. So again, here's how we have it in the mingle segment. Participants find a partner and share with one another for 2 or 3 minutes on a topic that you assign. And you make sure that in that time, both participants have an opportunity to share. And after 3 minutes, you tell them to find another pair and huddle up to continue the conversation on that topic for, again, 3, 4, 5 minutes. It depends on, how things are going and when you started. And we do this about 3 times. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. While folks are still standing after the huddles and mingles, we ask, if anybody has any burning questions that they want to have answered before we kind of move into the bulk of our training. And what we also have them do is while they are standing up, we have them line up because at the beginning of each day, we break them up into new tabled groupings. So we actually have this spelled out in the trainer's manual, but we have them count up by, line up by letter of their middle name, the letter of their favorite animal, number of siblings, and we try to tell them to do this piece silently. It gives them a chance to kind of practice some of those different communication skills, but also it makes it go pretty quickly so that you're not taking such a long time to get people lined up. And again, we do this every single day, so everybody kind of gets another opportunity to work with a different group of perspectives. Once the folks are back in their seats, we provide them with an overview of the day's agenda, as I did earlier with you all, kind of go through it, let people know where we're going, and then we review the working agreements that we had built on day 1. And the reason why we do this each morning is because there may be some things that maybe we didn't do so well on, and maybe, some of the side talk conversations interfered with some folks learning, and so maybe we need to add an agreement about that. This is a time where you as a trainer can suggest some things, things that you've noticed. Like I said, sometimes those side conversations tend to get in the way, or if somebody else has an issue like, gee, I noticed they can kind of bring this up, and this is where we would kind of negotiate and add anything to the working list that you already have posted in the room for the week. Any questions about that piece? Okay. On the morning of day 2, we provide an overview of active listening. And it's really just a sheet and a slide so that people can kind of get a sense of what that is and what that means. We don't spend a ton of time on it, but we want to point it out, and then we try to infuse people, remind people throughout the day, don't forget to use your active listening skills in this part and in this section, just so that people can kind of get some practice. And if you look at our CCAR Recovery Coaching Fundamentals, we call it our 3-legged stool. The very first leg is listening actively. And so this is definitely one of those things that we want to make sure that people understand and have a good grasp of. The next section is an exercise we call Values and Differences. This is where we ask individuals to fill out a worksheet about their personal values. We provide them with 15 minutes for this piece. So we want them to really kind of dig deep a little bit. This isn't one of those superficial, like quick 5 minutes, jot some things down, and then we'll put them into small groups. We really want them to take some time. And if you look at the questions, what are the attributes of people that you find yourself drawn to? What are the attributes of people you tend to try and avoid? I mean, we're really trying to get people to open up a little bit. And so we really want to give enough time for people to kind of go through this process. And then the next piece of this is to have participants partner up to share their experience of answering the personal questions. And we give a longer space of time for that so that each person kind of has 10 minutes to share their point of view. And again, we remind them about the active listening piece. When somebody's sharing for their 10 minutes, that person should be actively listening. We want them to practice those skills that we just talked about in the previous module. Any questions about that?
So when you do the active listening component, can that be an interactive kind of thing, or does it get kind of too out of control? Could that be?
You know, this is kind of, yeah, this is kind of a long, I mean, there's a lot of activities and things on this day. So, I mean, it really just depends. If you have a smaller group and you think you can probably take the time to do, you know, kind of a demonstration of active listening, or if you want to find like a video clip that shows it, you know, in just a few minutes, like shows somebody, you know, non-actively listening, or what have you, and you want to add that in there, absolutely. I mean, it's really just to review the information. Um, some people may have already heard of the term and just aren't sure what exactly it means. And so we just want to kind of bring people's attention to what it actually means so that when they're working with a recovery coach, they're reminded of, I need to really listen. I need to listen to what they're telling me. I can't be thinking about what my response is going to be. I really need to be focused on them, what they need, what their desire is here, and kind of, you know, really put the focus on that one person. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, we give it 10 minutes, but if you want to take some time and give people some time to practice or what have you, that's more than fine. You're welcome. And so again, with this day 2 values and differences, you know, we kind of go through and talk about, you know, we don't want people, they don't necessarily have to share some of their answers, but we want them to talk about, you know, what their experiences were in writing answers to these personal questions. And then on page 34, we have kind of a little list that a volunteer can read aloud about, you know, what it means to have an affinity for some over others, and why it's so important that we as coaches kind of check that and check those biases when we walk into the room. And then once we're done with these pieces, by the time you're done with the huddles, by the time you're done with the questions, the active listenings, and this piece, which is quite a big chunk of time, you're already at your first break on day 2.
That was quick.
Mm-hmm.
It does, absolutely. And then the other piece too is, as I mentioned before, you know, some of today is all, you know, about listening actively, but also discovering and managing your own stuff. And that's what that values and differences piece really starts to touch on. Obviously, we discover and manage more and more as the week goes on, but this is where that starts to come into play. So those who are familiar with clinical terminology may have heard of transference and countertransference, and this is what we call getting your buttons pushed. So we just kind of review it. There's a couple of slides just to kind of give people an understanding of what it is. You know, when a recovery might discover certain feelings or opinions about a coach based on past experiences and whatever, and it could also go the other way where a coach may have that same you know, experience with the recovery. And so we just want people to be aware of it. Again, this goes back to that whole managing your own stuff. And so if they need to think about, you know, what would I do? Should I, you know, if a recovery says to me like, gee, you remind me of blah, 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 and I have a hard time meeting with you, you know, the best thing would be to maybe talk with them about assigning them to another coach, you know, and then also for your own, you know, your own as a recovery coach, if something comes up for you and some personal thing that you can't push aside, what's, you know, what's the ethical decision to do? Should I assign them to another coach because I'm having issues here? So just kind of have some conversation about that. And then with the sexual harassment section, we have a couple of manual pages and a couple of slides. We just want to provide an overview because we know a lot of times recovery coaching is done either in volunteer settings or they're done informally. Sometimes they're done at local donut shops. I mean, they're not always under the auspices of a big professional organization that has done sexual harassment training. And so we just want to kind of give them a brief overview so that they don't participate in, and so they can also understand if it's being done to them. The one thing that we want to make trainers aware of is that, you're not a lawyer, so try not to get caught up if certain questions come into this piece of the training about specific situations, that you're not giving advice. At this point, I've had some people say, well, what if, I don't want to get into the, hypothetical situations and things such as that. We really want to keep this as, here's the information, just so you have it. And, if you have a question or whatever, you really should be referred back to your organization or the workplace supervisor. Any questions about that piece?
No, I like that refer back.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to get caught with like, well, this situation happened where, and now the whole room is like, wait, what? It could spiral very quickly. And so I always caution people, and we even have this in the trainer's manual, you're not a lawyer, try not to give advice, it's just easier to kind of keep it very general and very topical, to kind of bring it up. And then the other thing too is, like I said, this is also one of those pieces where if your organization, if you're training recovery coaches for RAFs, and RAFs has a specific training program or whatever to make sure that that people have an overview of what RAFs tolerates, doesn't tolerate, that type of thing. You could add some of those bullets in here, as well as a refresher. We also take some time on day 2 to talk about crisis intervention. We kind of give people an understanding of what we believe a crisis is. And so we have them complete an activity to determine what they think a crisis is and what a crisis is not. One of the sentences, I believe, says something like, a recovery comes to you and can't pay their bills. Is that a crisis or not a crisis? I think what's really cool about this piece is, depending on the different perspectives in the room, if you have, a show of hands, who thinks this is a crisis, and, 10 people's hands shoot up, and then who doesn't think it's a crisis, and, 2 or 3 people's hands shoot up, well, why don't you think it's a crisis? And then also ask the same of the people who, thought it was a crisis, so that they can hear each other's opinions. We had one situation where someone kept putting their hand up for everything, and he just said, I could see, depending on the person I'm working with and depending on how they reacted to a certain situation, where they could see where this could be a crisis. If somebody can't get over the fact that, okay, I can't pay my bills, could mean to somebody, I have to shut off my cell phone for a while, where another person can't pay their bills and there's a lock on their door and they can't get in, and now they're homeless for the evening. One is definitely more of a crisis than the other, but kind of teasing out some of those conversations and giving people that opportunity to go back and forth allows for all those experiences to come into the space, which really helps deepen the conversation about this. Any questions about that piece?
Nope.
Nope. So at that point, you're at lunch. And so you're already coming back from day 2. One of the things you'll notice on the agenda is we allow time after lunch for journaling. There is space in the RCA manual, some blank pages, so people can do some journaling if they would like. What we try to do is tell people that if you are going to provide the time and the space for journaling, even if it's 5 minutes, to remind people to be quiet. I know sometimes when people come back from lunch, it's a lot of energy, a lot of conversation, and people are, um, excited, and so we just want to make sure that for those people that are going to take the time to write some things down, that the room stays quiet. Sometimes we'll play like some soft music, or we'll have the lights a little dimmer right after, just to kind of give that mood of, now is kind of like a quiet time. But I mean, it's really up to you. And you can decide at this point if you want to do like a refresher where you get everybody up and stretch, or whatever it is that you want to do. We don't really have any specific exercise that we're suggesting or not suggesting. It's really up to you. Some people, I've seen trainers who've done like a 5-minute meditation just to get people back. I've seen people, let's get up and do like a head, shoulders, knees, and toes thing to get people up and moving. So it really is just whatever you're comfortable with. At CCAR, we pretty much, Phil plays music all the time at breaks, and things. And so what he'll do, as I said, is just put on some light music. We kind of dim the room a little bit, remind people to be quiet, and then once the time is over, we just start right into the afternoon. So stigma and labels is one of those activities that I will tell you that I still to this day, even though I understand it a great deal, I actually pull the paper out and read it, because it's one of those things where you really want people to understand all the directions in order for it to have the impact that we want it to have. And so what I usually do is during the lunch hour on day 2 is I prep, all of my easel paper that I want to have, with the different things. And if you look at your trainer's manual on page 13, this is all laid out. Each group, this is the activity where each group is assigned one of the following personas: people with an alcohol addiction, people with a drug addiction, and people with a mental health issue, and people in recovery. And so what you want to do is give them an opportunity to be assigned, each group to be assigned one of those labels. So you can put those on an index card, hand them out. You can put them on a table tent, whatever you'd like to do. And then you have them write down some characteristics while they're in their own group, about how they identify with that persona. And then, they post things up on an easel pad for, a few minutes. And then once they're done with that, then you have them go through and move to the next easel pad that is stationed up, and then that table moves to the next one, and so forth. So there's this rotation that goes on. And what you want people to remember is so if you have the people with the alcohol addiction are at their easel pad and they move over to the easel pad where it says people with a drug addiction, they don't take on the new persona of drug addiction. They stay as the people with an alcohol addiction. And so you just want to remember that people are doing that. You want to encourage them that they can use whatever words and phrases that they'd like. They can be negative, they can be positive, they can be neutral, just some words and phrases that they hear when they think of people with an alcohol addiction and people with a drug addiction, and so on and so forth. I don't know if you remember this piece, but this is one of those pieces where we really want to make sure that we take a lot of time and care to process this out. Once everybody's kind of visited each station and we post all the easel pads up, we give people kind of like an opportunity to kind of walk the room, to give them that time to reflect on all the words and phrases and really kind of feel what some of those things mean. And the reason being is because we want to make sure that we really address the piece about stigma and labels. We, as awful as some of those words and phrases are, we really want people to understand that when a recovery is coming into the room for the first time, that they've been treated like all of those words and phrases. And so as a coach, how do we treat them with dignity and respect? How do we make sure that they don't feel that way when they're meeting with us, or they, you know, maybe they're, have trepidation about coming in and chatting with us? And how do we help them to kind of shed some of those things that have been placed upon them? And so what we do is, once we have them kind of walk through the room and reflect silently on the words, we give them some time to stay seated, a few moments of silence, and then we take all the papers off the room and get them out of the space so that they don't kind of cloud the rest of the training. And then obviously from that, there's some slides on, words and stigma and labels and what stigma means, and some words and phrases in recovery that we try to focus on the positive and things such as that. Any questions about that piece?
No, I remember that now, that it was really heavy.
Yeah, it is very heavy. And we offer a long time to go through that process. And so, in the manual, you'll see we offer 75 minutes. We want this to be, one of those types of exercises that people really take the time. If you find that you have not enough people to kind of do the groups, you can kind of have them count off by fours, so that you do have one of each persona. You can, if you have like too huge of a group, you can kind of come up with some different ways to facilitate it. Maybe you have 2 different stations for each of those, however you need to do it. But at the end of the day, having all of those, those 4 different personas up and seeing, what people think about, who have an addiction, because really, especially when we're looking at working now in emergency departments and things, we might have people that are still in active addiction, and so if you're happy-go-lucky recovery coach walking into their emergency room and they're looking at you like, wait, what? That's why we really want to kind of have those 4 personas represented. Any questions about that piece? No? Okay. So the next piece we go into is sharing their story. And we have a whole exercise on page 44 that goes into that whole piece of sharing your story and what are the key factors, what does it mean when you share your story, what do you include, those types of things. And so we really want to give people an opportunity to kind of jot down their thoughts about that. And so at the end of this, what we really want people to get at is why sharing our story is purposeful, how to share it in a purposeful way, how to share it so that it serves the person and not ourselves, and really kind of understand, how to infuse it, into recovery coaching. I will say this, on day 4, when Phil does his CCAR experience DVD, he does a lot of sharing his story, and he weaves it in beautifully into all the facts and figures he gives about CCAR. He gives about the whole history of the recovery movement and things such as that. And so that's another really good example of when and how to share your story with a purpose. And so that's something that we spend some time with. And then another piece that we go into is issues of self-disclosure. So the last activity of the day is spent on looking at situations that may arise that can cause a coach to feel one way or another about a person they're working with, and what they might say in those situations. And so this is one of those ones where, let me just go to the right page to kind of bring out some of these. on page 46, where we asked them to rate on a scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, feelings of anxiety or uncertainty about what's happening in the conversation, doubts about my competence in being a coach, doubts about my expertise in some of the material I'm talking about. And you want to do the same way we did earlier with crisis and no crisis, is actually call out all the numbers and have people raise their hands as to how they rated things, and then have kind of like those who raise their hand for ones explain their perspective, and then go back and ask people who had their hand at 5 to give their perspective. You want to have both perspectives in the room. And as a trainer, you might even have, like, let's say everybody raises their hand at, 1. This is always very helpful. As a trainer, if you see some ways to play devil's advocate a little bit and stir the pot a little bit, and you want to say, well, I could see where saying this might be a harmful thing. I mean, absolutely, you do that as you'd wish. But I really think that this is one of those things where you want to go through each of these as a large group and have all those different perspectives shared in the room. Any questions about that piece?
Nope.
So at the end of day 2, we do pluses and wishes. Again, it just gives an opportunity for people to say what they really liked about the day, places where they might say, I wish we had done more about this and whatever. And if you have the space and you want to keep, pluses and wishes up, and kind of like a line on the wall, you can do that. That's really up to you. Sometimes it's nice to see how the week has evolved and what people wished for on day 1. By day 5, maybe, it wasn't a wish anymore because, we've kind of tackled them all throughout the week. That's really up to you. Any questions about day 2 at all? Any of the content that we covered?
Do you ever get anybody that's really upset by something, like really, really upset by something you've covered in one of those, like 4 personalities, or, 4, not personalities, but the labels, Yeah.
The personas? Not, to be honest with you, not really, because I think what we try to do, and I think the way that we provide the space with giving people that time to silently walk amongst the words, to reflect, to, kind of give them that kind of breathing room to do that piece. And then we give them that time to kind of sit and just sit with it for a bit. We haven't really had anybody like run out of the room or say, I really take offense to this or whatever. We do process out, at the end, we can give people time to, does anybody have any comments? And usually, even by the end of the day too, like, people are already ready to take care of each other. I've really found that anytime somebody needed to leave the room for any reason throughout the week. I know day 4 is another really powerful day with the power walk, and some people may get really affected by some of those phrases that are called out. We've had people get up and leave. In spirituality, that's a whole nother training program, but I had a woman that just something really affected her. And so, and Phil and I were training it together, and he was doing the piece, and so I was the one kind of sitting on the side, and she like quick grabbed me and was like, can I borrow you for a minute? And we walked outside and we processed it. So another reason I have 2 trainers is, for some of those pieces. But I will say, in most cases, as soon as somebody walks out of the room, there's already another participant or 2 or 3 that are ready to run out there after them, and that's why I made such a big deal of that whole community piece, and really, making sure that, people know who the trainers are, and making sure that people feel safe with who's in the room, and and avoiding like too much in and out kind of thing if they don't know who people are, because there is already that sense of community. I mean, when you think about it, even the beginning conversation and talking about your biases, I mean, that's not something that you talk about with even close friends right away. And so we're asking them to do that on day two, you know, and so there is already that relationship building that comes into play. And so if somebody does want to leave the room or feels like, you know, they need some space, they, you know, you can feel free to have one of the trainers go after them. You can feel free to um, have, you know, like I said, the participants will sometimes go after them. And, you know, at a break and at lunch, if you want to seek them out and just, you know, make sure they're okay or whatever, feel free to do so. I've never had anybody leave where it's
Okay.
interrupted the entire training.
Yep. Thank
Yeah. You're welcome. Any questions about anything else with day two?
No, I'm at an advantage, I guess, because I just filled out my little sheets a couple weeks ago, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of these words, you know, I remember, you know, so that's, you know, we're going over the things that, oh yeah, I was in that room. I put a number 3 over here. You know? Yeah. So that was very
Yeah.
helpful, you know, for me, you know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. So we'll move on to day three. So day three is very content heavy. And day three, I will say, is where we kind of change things up. So depending on when you took your RCA, we had a different order last year than what the manual states now. And I'll get into that in a minute, but just to give you an idea, day three is really about giving people an understanding of multiple pathways in order to help match them with what might work best. We interview stages of change. We introduce motivational interviewing. We give people an understanding of how to meet people where they're at, and how to meet their goals. And we provide the opportunity at the end of the day to do the role play as well. So that whole skit where they go through and they kind of review all the different things that we've done so far. We really take an opportunity to give people that time and space to have a little fun since it's such a heavy day. So in this day, the two biggest learning objectives that we cover: understanding the stages of recovery and describe the stages of change and their applications. And so this is the new order for 2018. So we start again with the reconnection and the review of the agenda. We go into a brief primer and motivational interviewing. We do that right up front. Then we move into stages of change. In the afternoon, we do that whole reconnection and journaling piece. We have the piece on stages of recovery. We have the piece on multiple pathways of recovery. And then again, as I've stated, we do that skit to make connections to everything that we've learned thus far before we close out. So let me explain, you know, just as we did in day two, we start off the day by doing huddles and mingles. We have people line up to 4 new table groups. We do a review of the working agreements, and we provide an overview of the agenda. And just as we did in day two, you can take some topics, or, you know, at the beginning of day three, you know, have a conversation of how important active listening is. What else do we do? Talk about why it's important to know about how to share your story. I mean, just random topics that will bring some of the learning of day two into day three. So motivational interviewing we start off with. because typically we did it at the end of the day, and we really feel like motivational interviewing is one of those key tools for coaches. We want to start it off in the beginning. We don't want people to be so overwhelmed between the stages of recovery and multiple pathways of recovery and stages of change. By the time they get to motivational interviewing, they're full, you know? And so we really want to start off the day with this. So we offer a primer, and again, this goes to that leg of the stool. You know, I reference the stool a lot about asking good questions. So with this primer, again, it's just, you know, like everything else, we're touching on certain topics. We're not able to, you know, dive too deep. I mean, you could have a whole training on motivational interviewing. I know there's college courses on motivational interviewing. I mean, you know, we really are just providing a brief primer. But you review the slides, talk about the 5 key principles, and give people an understanding of what it is. What we've added in this section is we give each other an opportunity to role play so that they can practice those interviewing or those motivational interviewing techniques. One of the pieces we heard from people a lot is they want more opportunities to role play and to practice recovery coaching. And so this is an opportunity for them to do so. And so we offer some space to do that. And so if you look at on page 6 of your trainer's manual at the bottom, we have the instructions of the scenario that we're putting into place for this role play. And again, this is something new that we put in to kind of really give people that opportunity to practice motivational interviewing because we think that it's such an important part.
No, I like that.
Any questions about that?
Thank you. I only took recovery
You're
in
welcome.
December. That was my wish. We granted it in January.
Oh, look at that. Like I said, sometimes when people put those wishes up there, sometimes we can make them happen. Sometimes not in that week, but we do try. So with the stages of change, we move from learning about a tool or skill to learning about the framework for change that's commonly used in working with those who have an addiction called stages of change. First, we give an opportunity for to look at the change that they made. So if you remember, we asked them to take a look at a change that they had to make in their life. Let me just get to the page. My experience with change, which is on page 57. And we don't ask them to talk about the actual change, just what supports were in place and what obstacles were in place. Just to kind of get them to think about you know, the different things that can also help and hinder someone's progress in this work. And then we go through what the 5 stages are, and then an understanding of the tasks that can take place, both on a recovery's perspective and from a coach's perspective, to help move someone from one stage to the next. And that's really, I mean, this is where it's like there's a lot of slides in this section. And that's why, again, we really wanted to take some time to really give people that opportunity to have motivational interviewing first and really have that opportunity to kind of practice before we dive in to the stages of change piece. And that's pretty much the morning. Because it is so content heavy, you know, you do those 2 big modules, I want to say, and then you're already at the lunch hour. Any questions about the stages of change piece? It is a lot. It is a lot. And so one thing that I will say is that if you know, you could have people take turns reading the slides so that you're not the one who's always reading. You know, however you want to kind of train that section so that you kind of also give your voice box a break is, you know, more than acceptable because it is a lot. Any questions about that? So the next piece that we move on to is after lunch and after journaling, and if you want to do a refresher, is the stages of recovery. And this is, so the reason why we do it this way now, and we lead from stages of change into stages of recovery, is that when we think about the stages of change model, and we think about, you're in, action, and then you get to maintenance, it's almost like, okay, you're all set, you're done. And we know that in recovery, people are not done. There's a lot more growth that goes into it. And so it really feeds nicely into what the stages of recovery are. Because, somebody can go very quickly through from pre-contemplation all the way up to maintenance or to action and maintenance in a matter of like a few months. But then what do? Well, they're in the stages of recovery. And when we look at the stages of recovery and we think about all the different things that people go through, from stabilization to deepening to connectedness to integration to fulfillment, those are all things that they do while they're in the maintenance stage. And so we share this new graphic to kind of explain, how we see it kind of building from that pre-contemplation piece at the bottom all the way up through fulfillment. So that is, and there's a few slides in there. So one of the things that we also like to make people aware of with the stages of recovery is that, it's a guide. People shouldn't feel like, oh, I've been in recovery for this, and sometimes I feel like I keep going back and forth, or, oh my goodness, I'm not going to feel that way until I'm 20 years in. I mean, we don't want people to be, held up by limitations or what this is. It's a guide. It's a framework. I think the biggest takeaway with the stages of recovery is, especially if you have family members or people who are not in recovery in the room, because a lot of times you'll find that family members will send, that person into a treatment center or whatever, and they're in there for their 30 days, 90 days, and when they come out, they expect them to be right as rain, and we know that that's not what happens. That person still has, yes, they've taken care of the addiction piece, but now they have to look at how they're able to maintain that lifestyle, that recovery lifestyle, and all the supports that go into play, and what that looks like. And I feel that this piece really helps kind of spell it out for somebody who maybe doesn't have that firsthand experience with it. Any questions about that piece? And does it make sense now, like, to have kind of stages of change go into stages of recovery? I mean, can you see how that flows a little bit better? Might give people more of that, like, oh, okay, now I get it.
And this is like so two-sided too, because it's the families that expect their expectations, but it's also the person who's, starting out to be a little like slow down kind of thing, when you're working with them, like, don't expect feelings yet for 5 days,
Right.
That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as coaches, I remember all of these things.
Yeah, like
where I am.
Right.
So it's awesome.
Well, and that's the whole thing. And people will, when we're going through them and you stop and have the conversation after each one, you'll find the people who say, oh, I totally remember when I was there. And, oh, I remember this piece. And wow, I feel like I did some of this stage before I even did this stage, And so again, it's a framework. And some people, it doesn't have to be like A, B, C, D, E all the time. There might be places where people go back and forth a little bit. But it really helps to kind of just give people, like you said, that understanding of, wow, I thought I would feel so much better. I'm 60 days in, or I thought I would be like, feeling amazing. And it's like, whoa, you just started this process, and it is a process. And yes, that's wonderful that you've gotten up through the stages of change piece, but there's a whole lot of learning and growth, in recovery. And then the other piece too is, as you said, some of these people who, very early on, because they found recovery and they feel amazing, now they want to tackle the world. And so helping them to realize, that you can give some time to this. Not everything has to be, you don't have to be super bad. Not everything has to be handled, overnight. And, I just think it really kind of gives again, some understanding, especially for people who maybe don't have some firsthand experience, or for people who are newer in recovery, to kind of, have a framework of what it even looks like. And Phil was the one who actually came up with fulfillment, because he even thought like the integration, like even that wasn't the end of it. That, and even in fulfillment, there's still things that, he works on, and he's 30 years in recovery, so it's kind of one of those things where um, it's ever evolving, and people are ever evolving, and we want people to realize that it's not a, one and done type of thing, that it's a whole process, it's a journey. Any questions about that
I find
piece?
that not just for the person who is going to enter recovery, hopefully, but families and significant others and other people who are connected with them and concerned about them, but who have been doing things wrong or have unreasonable expectations from the past. It helps. This
Mm-hmm.
graphic here is very helpful to me, at least it looks that way, of explaining to them this process that we're talking about. Like a lot of times, families members, they think, well, he went in for treatment for a week, and he came back and he changed, you see, or this and that and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, hopefully that
Right.
treatment was to maybe even create the create the idea that maybe something's wrong, you know, and maybe you ought to
Right.
contemplate something.
Right.
You
To
see,
plant that
you know,
seed.
whereas the family is getting this character back,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that something happened on one hand, but in reality, somebody's not even beginning to think at it yet. Maybe you see, and this would be a very helpful
Mm-hmm.
graphic in explaining
Absolutely.
we might be talking about some years here. You see, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and how to bring that subject in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's all. Yeah, my share there too.
No, absolutely. I mean, and this is one of those pieces that I think that, I mean, I've always been, so I'm not a person in recovery. I am, my father was an addict my whole life. And so, and I can't even, I mean, I can't count the times that he relapsed and came out and, went back in, and, but I always had the expectation that when he came out, he was gonna be like the dad that I want, and and I'm sure he probably even had some of that expectation too. Like I went in, I did my 30 days, I should come out, should feel so much better, and so, and he was a Vietnam vet, so there were some underlying issues there, and things that he had to deal with, and whatnot. And so I can see somebody even not feeling 100% great, even in recovery, wanting to kind of look at this and be like, wow, I should be feeling better, or I should be feeling differently, or maybe something, and what else do I need to do? What else do I need to work on, kind of thing. And I think, again, like, with the family piece, it gives us that opportunity to realize that we can't put our expectations on that person either, and it gives us a little bit more of an awareness of what this is, what that journey looks like, where, we really had no idea before that it could take somebody, years before they start to feel, I mean, yes, they're going to feel better, but I mean, it could take them quite a long while before they feel like they're okay, and not that they have to worry about, a trigger or whatever, but, at least to the point of, if something comes up,
And
I can
the
handle
family
it,
members will
you know?
allow themselves to feel some good and betterness because they're not setting themselves up for disappointment from expectations not met. So it's like a win-win if everyone's familiar with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, feel free, and this is one of those graphics that, I mean, if you have family members who come in and you want to, take a copy of this out of the manual and use it to explain things, being a center as you are, you might have, parents who come in who just, well, I did this and I put him here and he's still, and if it helps kind of have make people feel better about what's going on, I mean, feel free to use it. It's to me, it's like, I mean, it's the way Phil, kind of talked through it, and it makes so much sense. That to see the stages of change move into the stages of recovery is really such a it's beautifully done, and so feel free to use that as a tool as you see fit. Yeah, no. Absolutely. All right. So then on day 3, we talk about the multiple pathways of recovery. This is really one of those things where, again, it's that whole discover and managing your own stuff and what you can support and what you feel like, I don't know if I can support that, and so we talk about the different pathways as outlined by Bill White. The scope of recovery, types of recovery, the context, the framework, how people identify themselves. And we really just go through, a whole piece on, what those different types of pathways are. And then the other piece is, we give people that opportunity before we begin this module to kind of throw out and brainstorm all those different pathways that they've heard of. And writing those all out on an easel pad, faith-based, smart recovery, well-briety movement, women in sobriety, having that space to give people that opportunity to call those things out just allows for maybe people who haven't heard from some of those things to hear of something that, like, oh, wow, I've never heard of that. What is that like? And, oh, I've never even knew that there was online in the rooms kind of thing, and really just gives an opportunity for people to kind of brainstorm the different pathways that they know about, especially if you're working within a community and you have people talking about different pathways that they've used in the community. Then they can also share some resources with each other. Oh, there's a so-and-so meeting held this place, and oh, I had no idea, and it just allows for some of those conversations. The way we finish the activity in this whole piece is by giving them, I believe it is on page 71. Yes, 71, assessing my personal stance to different differing pathways of recovery. So it gives people that opportunity to kind of think about what they would support, what they might have a harder time supporting. Again, just so they kind of get into that understanding of where they might need to discover and manage their own stuff. One of the biggest things for us, I mean, we talk about it on day 1, you're in recovery, if you say you are type of thing. There are still some people that are still kind of wrestling with some of that, even on day 3. No, recovery means abstinence. No, recovery means no medication. I mean, there's still some of those mindsets. And so this really gives people kind of that space to kind of have those conversations and hear the different perspectives in the room. Any questions about that piece? Then from there, we go on to making connections. That's the skit, which is basically wrapped up by providing participants with an opportunity to review all the different concepts that they have learned thus far through a skit. And so what we try to do is we try to make this as fun as possible. Phil always puts some twists in there, like incorporate the word tortilla. I think last time he actually said incorporate a superhero. And so there were like people that come up and I'm super recovery coach and whatever, and they made capes out of their fuzzy pipe cleaners and things such as that. But it really is meant to keep it fun because this is such a heavy day, so that people are really kind of able to kind of lighten the mood a little bit and get up out of their chairs and kind of have some fun with this piece. Any questions about the skit? So the one thing that is different about closing day 3 is we don't do pluses and wishes. We kind of finish by processing out the skits and having those conversations, and then we just let people go. Again, we want people to kind of leave on that really fun, light note, and so we just wish them well and bid them adieu for the evening. Any questions
No.
about that piece?
I love the skits.
Yeah, the skits are kind of like that time where people can really like have some fun and stretch a little bit and think about the different scenarios that they might want to keep up, think about, or things that may have come up that now they want to kind of use that time and space to practice and whatnot. And so it's a really cool opportunity for people to like I said, practice, but also have some fun with it. So that is day 3. What questions do you have?
No, I don't have any questions, just that an observation is how important that was in getting to know these possibilities of transference that we might find ourselves in. Things like, and I see that as being very important. And I guess we have to like live it and see how this goes, for us as individuals. Who knows what might pop up with me? Should somebody get in front of me, and and then I'm thinking back, and getting ill feelings, see, from this character. I know of one. I still have a friend. He's not dead. I just don't see him anymore. But he was going into therapeutic practice, and he was getting credentials and everything. And he happened to have a daughter who died from an overdose. And I guess it was this careless marketing of that's going on an awful lot now of marketing things, And he was telling me how this happened to him, that this transference, and all of a sudden the people who sold substances to support their own habits and things like that were what he was thinking to be the cause of his daughter's death, you see. So I hope he has gotten through this to a better extent, because when he was talking to me about this about 5-6 years ago, he was having troubles with this. So when certain kind of characters in front of him,
Yeah,
that he was imagining was what
absolutely.
exactly happened, to his daughter. What exactly? College student at the time.
Wow.
I think when we go,
Wow.
I think when you go through all that, even when
Yeah,
you discuss like multiple pathways
yeah, go ahead.
of recovery, which obviously, well, not obviously, RAPS does support multiple
Mhm.
partners. It's interesting to hear people's different supports of multiple partners. Them supporting it is sometimes different than
Mhm.
maybe their acceptance of it. You know, and I think, I don't know, we were here the other night and, you know, it was said that, you know, well, supporting all pathways to recovery, and it's kind of like as a segue into finally getting fully out of everything or complete abstinence. It was just an interesting thought we heard, and not that it's right or wrong or, you know, it's what he was
Mhm.
saying. Yeah, I didn't misunderstand that. Okay, thank you. And it's okay. That's if that's what he thinks, as long as it's not portrayed onto somebody else. It's his own thought. But it was just interesting to me that how I hadn't, I wouldn't realize that different thought until it was brought up.
Yeah, I know
You hear what I'm saying?
that has bothered me too, because I didn't really hear much of this
Yeah,
until
absolutely.
a couple months ago.
Yeah.
You know, it was very good for me who was in, what do they call me now, long-term recovery or
Mm.
something like that. I don't know what I am. You know?
We'll tell you.
Mhm.
Angry guy, yeah. But anyway, I understand it, and so I will accept it, okay. But in the back of my mind, I'm saying, you know, why take this? Why you can? Why even play with that when there's a positive way of putting the hammer down? And put the trigger on it. Why? Okay, okay.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
you know. So anyway, I have to persevere with that, no doubt about it, because I just know that I will have a negative to that just on the surface when it happens to me.
But that you know what works for you.
And
That was just
Mhm.
kind of my well, this is gonna work for me, so
yes,
it's gotta be
well, yes, it worked for me, and others are different. They're very different, and they have other issues and
right.
things, and some of them need neurochemistry adjustments, and fine, I understand that. But but to think that, oh, I never had trouble with uh, alcohol. I just had trouble with other things. I heard over 36 years, too many not good things. You see,
Yeah.
period. What can I say? Not just me.
Right.
I heard several hundred
Mhm.
stories.
It's almost like when you were talking earlier about going around and the differences between what's a crisis for one person is a crisis.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly,
Right. Right.
exactly.
Mhm.
Big difference between I don't have a bill to pay for
Right.
my gadgets for the month versus I got to go out and market something tonight. I mean, you got to buy it or get it and then sell it. There's a big difference.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And and I think that's why we really value treating everybody in the room as a resource, and that's why even, we always say, we're not the experts in the room as the trainers, we're just facilitating a process because, when you have all those different perspectives coming from all those different people, um, that again, they've already built this community and this relationship with, like, it would be easy for somebody to just disagree with the instructor. Well, I don't believe what he's saying, and that's, whatever. I know that recovery is abstinence, it's AA, it's what I did, that's the only way, and whatever. But you have somebody who stands up and says, I was an active heroin addict and I was able to go back to work, rebuild my family, buy a new home because I've been on methadone and I'm still in recovery to this day because, and I can live and be successful and everything else. that changes people. Hearing those experiences changes people. I know with my own dad, he was an alcoholic. He, smoked marijuana. He started to store cocaine. Eventually, he was a full-blown heroin addict. At the end, methadone was the only thing that gave me my father back, and so of course I'm going to value all those different pathways. Of course but it's only because I have that experience. AA didn't work for him, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't work look at how many people it has worked for. And I think one of the pieces that comes up, and this is just through experience that I hear a lot, is, just because we're valuing all of these other pathways doesn't mean that we're negating the success of the other ones. We're just realizing that just because we say, oh my goodness, smart recovery is this and this and this and this and this, nobody's negating the success of 12-step programs. Nobody's saying like, well, there's all these new things, so we don't need to do it that way anymore. I mean, there's plenty of room for all these pathways. We don't have to rely on, well, if it isn't this, it's not going to work, but we really do have to think about, where our stuff is, as coaches. What are the things that we can accept? Am I going to be able, if somebody says to me in a coaching session, well, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, or I'm not snorting coke anymore, but I feel like I can have wine every weekend because alcohol wasn't my drug of choice. As a coach, can we support that? As a coach, what do we do with that? Are we going to sit there and be like, oh, okay, that's great and that's fine? Do we sit there? Do we use some motivational interviewing and be like, how's that working for you? And kind of, okay, and kind of bring up some things, or do we say, you know what, I can't work with you because I don't agree with that, So there's time and space for all those different things to come up. And I think when you have all those different perspectives in the room, there's more opportunity for those things to come up. And so we don't have to keep bringing them up for people. They'll bring all these things up amongst themselves. And then they're going to have such a deeper, richer learning experience than we could have ever done just by talking to them for 5 days straight.
Stated, like, in my opinion.
I think it's very important what we've covered before about the labels and stigma. Very important. One example, when labels and stigma, one of our co-directors asked if anyone wanted to put a sticker on their car. It wasn't a small sticker, it was a pretty big sticker. and well, I ain't doing that. I'm not going to let anyone know that. And meanwhile, why not? I mean, am I afraid of that label?
Right.
So I can't look and be open about pathways of recovery if I still have a label on recovery. Open really made me think about that, and I just appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Time before I was able to coach anyone or train anyone. I'm not a trainer yet, but to have the time to process that, because I walked in, a balloon overhead with all this information, and I had so now I sit here a month later, a recovery coach, now just a trainer. So now I see a brand new outlook on it. As far as different pathways, and I think just, taking that month for me, learning from getting involved.
Yeah.
That now, accept for the family, because it's necessary in our society. So the only thing I don't accept is, and I have to work on that, is you're in recovery if you say you are. Like, you gotta do something.
You'll get there.
Well, that's the pre-contemplation. So Someone contemplating recovery. Okay. Someone contemplating recovery. Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, that definition is really more about what proof do I need from somebody for them to prove to me that they're in recovery? If somebody says they're in recovery when they say they are, I kind of have to take them at face value. And when somebody comes into CCAR, we don't drug test the people who come into CCAR. I don't have any way of knowing that they didn't just light up before they came in. I mean, there's I have to trust them at face value. If they're going to come in and they're going to say, I'm here, I want help, or I'm here, I want to use the computer or whatever. I mean, I kind of have to give them that benefit of believing that if they say they're in recovery, I kind of need to give them that trust and kind of see where it goes, and I think that's kind of where, like, why we have that stance on you're in recovery when you say you are, because, everybody's definition is different. How everybody gets there is different. And I have no way of knowing what you are saying to me is even your truth, and so I think that's really where that whole piece really comes into
Eye-opening,
play.
thank you.
That's kind of the spirit of
What
that
you just said,
definition.
it's a whole different, I'm like, ah.
Eye-opening, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I'm glad. You're welcome.
Are we frozen?
So what if you had to look at the past 2 days of the training and the conversations that we had? And I know we've brought up some things now, but what do you think would be the most difficult piece to train?
We didn't hear what you said.
Like the most, like, yeah. I'm sorry, I missed that. I just said, what would be if you had, oh, I'm sorry. If you had to look at the last couple of days of training, what module or what piece do you think would be the most challenging?
So far?
Yeah.
I think for myself, and I think probably the time when I went through, it was it's definitely the four personas, because it just so deeply affects me that the negative comments were about someone I love, and it tore me
I
apart
think
then, and
for
I know,
myself,
you know,
I think
it's something that would still bother me. That people
it's
talk, you're a junkie, you know, whatever.
it just so
Mhm.
deeply affects
I know they'll bother me when I'm doing the class.
about
Right.
That's just me.
and I know this will bother me.
Yeah.
That people talk, you're a junkie. Yeah,
Mhm.
I know bother me when I'm in the class.
Mhm. Well,
That's just
yeah, no, the one thing that I can say about that, and that is, I mean, honestly, throughout the whole week, I know the power walk is really powerful on Thursday, the fourth day, and the stigma and labels piece is really powerful, and both for kind of the same reasons. We're calling people out, we're making them expose pieces of themselves, or we're putting a label on them, that they've probably felt, but nobody ever, kind of, really put it up on a wall so that they had to stare at it before. And I think the only thing that I can say, advice wise, with any aspect of this training is to just be genuine, and to just be, I mean, give the instructions for, that piece and just say, when I first did this, and even today, this is still difficult for me. It's difficult for me to see those words on the wall. It's difficult for me to, think of the loved ones that I've had that, had an addiction, or myself, or, whatever your story is. I think this is one of those classic examples of using your story for purpose, and saying, it hurts me to see that that's what people thought about my father. That hurts me to see that that's what people thought about my son or my brother or whoever it is, or yourself if you're a person in recovery. It hurts me to see those words because I identified with, all of them at one point or another, or I knew that wherever I walked in, because I was an addict, somebody thought at least 10% of those things about me. I mean, I think the best thing you can do, like I said, with any of these is to just be genuine and be vulnerable. I mean, throughout this whole RCA process, everybody in the room, and I mean, and you will have known this yourself as you have experienced it for yourself. I mean, it really does change you. It impacts you. When I first took this training, and it's funny because we just had our annual meeting yesterday, and I talk about this because I took the RCA 5 years ago. I started at CCAR 5 years ago, and my role was to coordinate this RCA training, and so I walked into this room. I had just started at this agency. I wasn't a person in recovery, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to give my recovery status. And then everybody in the room pretty much was in recovery except for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, how am I even going to connect with these people? And they're going to be like, what are you doing here? And so there were so many pieces of this training that affected me and changed the way I felt about my dad, changed the way I felt about how I interacted with people. I mean, even the spectrum of attitudes, I like sat there and I'm like, oh my God, I treat my kids like objects all the time. I mean, even not even being, but then I learned that there's a time and a place for all of that. And so there's so much growth that I had and so much that I learned about myself and I discovered about myself, which is what we want coaches to do, to discover and manage their own stuff. And even though I wasn't in recovery, I had stuff, and by the end of the week I realized that I had a lot of stuff, and so I think that having experienced this training for yourself puts you in the best possible place to be able to train it, because you know exactly what people are feeling when they're going through each of those modules. And so you know exactly, how to say, you know what, when I first did this, and even with that original, that who am I piece with the pie chart, and you're cutting people's pie pieces out, and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't want to take somebody's identity away from them. And it's and then, you kind of oh, that's why we're doing it. I mean, you kind of want to wait for that aha moment, because you had them throughout the whole week. So you just, when you train it and you see those aha moments happening, even just the aha with the you're in recovery when you say you are, those are magical moments, that you get to experience as a trainer. And so, enjoy them and relish them, and just, be genuine, just be yourself, and like I said, those pieces of the training curriculum that get tough, again, there's so much community and love in the room already. It kind of takes care of itself. You're welcome. Anything that anybody else, any questions that anybody has? I know we went through a lot, but I want to make sure you all have what you need. before we end, at least tonight. I know we're meeting again next Tuesday, so I know there's still time to talk about, you know, if there's anything that come up, but I just want to make sure
I think that's
people
it.
have what they need before we end
Okay.
tonight.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Thank you for sharing.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you guys for spending some time. Absolutely. You guys too. And I will send you the PowerPoint for the
I'll get
next
you yours,
4
Mark.
and 5 so that you have that.
I'll get that.
And then I think that's it. If you think of anything that you need from me, don't forget you can email me, stacy@ccard.us. And I know you guys know how to get in touch with me and have my phone number. So if you need anything between now and then, let me know.
Hey, have a nice Stacy.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course.